At around 20 to 10 in the evening on September the 20th last year, a motorcyclist made his way into the South London district of Vauxhall. He was heading for Spring Gardens, a small public park just south of 85 Vauxhall Cross, the imposing £240 million building which is now home to MI6, Britain's foreign secret service. He'd chosen a quiet time. The park was for the most part deserted, and the pub which stands at its corner was closed on this particular evening. Stopping in the middle of the park, in full view of a building crowned with infrared surveillance devices, he then began a simple routine. From a holdall, he took out an anti-tank rocket launcher. Within seconds, the device had been assembled, the pop-up sights were in place, the warhead was primed. Raising the launcher to his shoulder, he took aim. He was just under 200 yards away from the headquarters of MI6. The missile exploded just below a window on the 8th floor, the same floor where Sir Richard Dearlove, the chief of the Secret Intelligence Service, has his office. Grabbing the bag, the man ran back to his bike, dumping the launcher cylinder en route. He rode off with his lights turned off.
Reports are coming in of an explosion in London, close to the London headquarters of the security. Found a number of fire engines and ambulances.
The explosion, we think, took place around 9:45.
Witnesses said they heard two blasts, one as the rocket ignited, the other as the grenade smashed into the building.
I thought at first it might be fireworks, but then the floor shuddered a bit, and the cup that I was holding began to rattle, and I realised my hands were shaking as well, and I realised it was probably a bit more.
MI6 had been hit by a high-explosive rocket. It was one of the most audacious terrorist attacks ever witnessed in the United Kingdom. 2 days later, the anti-terrorist branch in London produced a replica of the weapon used in the attack. The Soviet-designed Mark 22 rocket launcher was said to have caused only minor superficial damage. But the attack had been a major publicity success for the terrorists involved. In Irish Republican terms, what happened here last September amounted to a spectacular. Targets do not get much more high profile than this. But how precisely did a terrorist group manage to get hold of such a potentially lethal rocket launcher and bring it within 200 yards of this inner sanctum of British intelligence? Tonight on Home Ground, we travel to the Balkans to investigate the arms deal which delivered these weapons into the hands of the Real IRA. The attack caused major disruption, but as to who was behind it, the police would speak only in general terms.
There was no warning, as I told you earlier, nor have there been any claims of responsibility. Clearly, this sort of weapon that we believe was used in this attack is known to be in the hands of certain groups.
Do you have any indication as to which particular group it is?
Well, it's really unnecessary to speculate further than this is a distant Republican terrorist group.
The answer to which dissident Republican group can be found in the type of weapon which was used.
And this is the RPG-7. It even looks a horrific weapon. I think you'll all agree with that.
In the past, Republicans have only ever deployed this version of a rocket-propelled grenade, the RPG-7, a muzzle-loaded, reloadable anti-tank weapon. They've been a feature of the provisional IRA's armoury for over 20 years. What's so significant about the weapon found in London is that it represents a totally new type of rocket launcher. This is an RPG the provisionals have never used. Built in the Eastern Bloc, these shorter, more lightweight, disposable weapon systems were used extensively in the Balkans during the wars of the early 1990s.
They're comparatively easy to use. In fact, the ones that I have seen, the types that I have seen, have had these little cartoons on the side. There is Cyrillic Russian writing, but even if you don't read Russian, a third world soldier could still follow the instructions.
The security forces know of one Republican group in particular, the Real IRA, which has access to these disposable rocket launchers. The police first became aware that the Real IRA had these weapons 18 months ago, when members of the Garda's elite emergency response unit raided a bunker on farmland near Stamullen in County Meath. They discovered an old wine cellar which had been turned into a purpose-built firing range. The bunker was being used as a Real IRA training camp. On the ground they found an assault rifle, a submachine gun and a 9mm pistol. 10 people were arrested there at the time. A few miles away in a hayshed belonging to one of those arrested, they then found more arms. As with the weapons in the cellar, these devices were not familiar to the guards. No one had anticipated finding a rocket launcher from the Balkans.
This particular type of weapon and the other items which we're not sure what they contain yet, they have not been seen here before. That is of concern to us, and to that end an operation, both search operation and inquiries which have been ongoing here for the past number of weeks, will continue.
The weapons find at Stamullen had been hugely significant. Everything pointed to the fact that the Real IRA had established a new supply of weapons and explosives, and they were coming in from the Balkans.
It was a major breakthrough, and it became clear from what they found there that they had a lot of new equipment, new explosives, new types of grenade launchers, which could not have come from provisional IRA dumps, had not been seen here by the security forces either on the south or the north of the border.
Croatian TV confirmed on the 13th of July last year that an arms trail from the Balkans did exist. It was reported that a major arms shipment had been intercepted in the south of the country. The local police were soon briefing journalists that the weapons had been destined for terrorists in Ireland. Within days of the seizure, police in the Republic arrested Joe Fee in connection with the case. Although later released without charge, it was said last December in the Commons that he'd been identified as the leader of the Continuity IRA and as the vital contact between Croat smugglers and the Real IRA. This is the Adriatic port of Split, a picturesque city in the southern Dalmatian region of Croatia. It's the country's second largest town and plays a key maritime role serving the Balkans. The weapons were found 60 kilometers east of here, in the mountains of the ironically named Sister Provo region. Dobranja is a small farming community close to the border with Bosnia. For 2 days last July, the village was surrounded by special police units. They'd received intelligence from the Croat Secret Service that an arms shipment was expected in the village. Late in the evening on Wednesday, the 12th of July, a 30-strong squad from the local police force moved into Dobranja. They headed straight for a bar at the bottom of the village, and within hours, a number of arrests had been made. The police returned the following morning and searched a number of buildings behind me. What they found in one of those buildings was to have huge significance for anti-terrorist operations in Belfast, Dublin and London.
We tried to move our forces in the part of village where we are expecting that there is another possibility that weapon is hidden. And second day we found a respectable quantity of weapon with rocket missiles, explosive, bullets, and everything what is possible to be used in terrorist action.
The weapons were found in the middle of this hayshed. The seizure was put on display and a statement issued which identified terrorists in Western Europe as the intended recipients. The links to the weapons found in the Real IRA bunker in Meath were striking. 7 RPG-18 rocket launchers were seized in Dobranja, one of which offered a close match in serial number to the device found near Stamullen. Both had originated from the same factory batch.
This is very important thing that we can prove that there is connection between weapon found here in Dobranja and the weapon found in Ireland.
The TNT packs found in Croatia also bear remarkable similarities to the devices found in the Republic. In Dobranja, 20 kilos of the Bosnian explosive TM500 were seized, half of which had been strapped together by 1-inch sellotape bearing the batch number 8303. In Meath, the police discovered 6.5 kilos of TM500 packed in exactly the same way and bearing exactly the same batch number. We've also discovered that it was this type of explosive which was recovered in a failed Republican bomb attack on a railway line in London last July. And it was the same TM500 which was used a month before to blow a hole in Hammersmith Bridge. Significantly, the Dobranja find also yielded an RPG-22. It was the same make and model as the one used in the attack on the MI6 building. Soon after the Dobranja weapons had been seized, the local police announced that the arms had been smuggled into Croatia from the neighbouring country of Bosnia. They would have been transported across the border into the village of Dobranja. There is little doubt that the arms did originate in Bosnia, a land still scarred by the civil wars of the early 1990s. Cities like Mostar still bear the architecture of war. These decrepit buildings are appropriate monuments to the hideous attempts at ethnic cleansing which so marked the conflict here. The weapons of that conflict, once so valuable to the war effort, have long been more valuable to the black market. These Croat militiamen from Bosnia can be seen firing the RPG-18s, the very same make of throwaway rocket launcher which has now made its way into the arsenal of the Real IRA. Ever since the end of the war, there's been a huge surplus of weapons in the former Yugoslavia, and those charged with decommissioning them are only too aware that, despite their efforts, that surplus remains vulnerable to the black marketeers.
The suspicion that they came from Bosnia-Herzegovina, I think, is very well grounded. You know, this area remains an area where weapons can be easily obtained, and as in most post-conflict, post-war countries with devastated economies, weapons are easily obtainable below market prices. In the last year, there have been about 6,800 grenades seized, over 400 mines seized, and about 60,000 rounds of ammunition. And those were turned in voluntarily.
In some quarters, there is an affinity between the Croats and the Irish, which goes much further than just shared musical tastes. As epitomised by the thousands of Irish Catholics who travel to the shrine at Medjugorje each year, there are powerful religious links between the two nations. But there are also those in Croatia who see the cause of Irish republicanism as a mirror image of their own recent struggles.
Well, I would say that in Croatia, at this point in time, probably nobody would complain much about the IRA. But I would imagine that a lot of Croats would feel empathy for, or would understand the desire of the Irish Catholic population of Ulster to leave the United Kingdom, a federation where they don't feel a part of, because this was very much a position we were in back in the 80s. We wanted to leave the Yugoslav Federation, and in that respect, I think a lot of people would make, very simplistically, but would make those parallels.
So who was involved in the arms smuggling? The hayshed in which the Dobranja weapons were discovered belongs to the Tubelich family, a family so prominent in Dobranja that part of the village has been named after them. Tomislav Tubelich, seen here, was arrested in the village at the time of the raid, along with an older brother. Their cousin Ante Tubelich, a 32-year-old electrician living in the Croatian capital Zagreb, was arrested a few days later. According to the police, he was the man calling the tune in Dobranja. Ante will soon be on trial charged with unlawful possession of weapons. He's also being investigated for offences relating to international terrorism. The family insists that the weapons seized on their property were merely souvenirs from the war.
We are touching somebody who was in war and keeping some war trophies at home. I hope that now the situation is quite different, that people can understand that this weapon was never war trophy, that this was a small arsenal prepared and ready to be transported and sold somewhere else.
Interviews were sought with the Tubeliches, but neither they nor their lawyers wanted to comment. When we eventually caught up with Tomislav Tubelich in Dobranja, he refused to speak to us. We were threatened and told to leave the village. If Ante Tubelich represents the ringleader of the gang in Croatia, he also provides the crucial link to Republican terrorists. It's a connection which has its roots in the massive international aid effort which became such a feature of the Bosnian War. Aid convoys poured into the Balkans in the mid-1990s, bringing much-needed relief to what had become a humanitarian disaster. Hundreds of charities from across the world became involved, and working for one of them at the time was Ante Tubelich.
I can say that he was in a humanitarian organization. His previous job was in humanitarian organizations, and that's possible way how he gets a contact with somebody who was interested to buy a weapon.
Do we know which humanitarian organization he was involved in?
He was working for Caritas, as I know.
It's understood that Tubelich was working for Caritas Italiana as a driver and translator. Many of the aid workers would have spent time in Split during this period, since the port became a vital logistical base for the charities.
Split is important because it's strategically it's an important Mediterranean port. It's the town where during the war in Bosnia most international organizations active in Bosnia had its headquarters. Contacts were made.
In the case of the Croatian arms deal, one very significant contact was made, according to a question asked in the House of Commons 4 months ago. The issue was raised by the Ulster Unionist MP, Geoffrey Donaldson.
Will the Minister make time available at an early opportunity to debate the growing threat from dissident Republican groups?
He stated that Ante Tubelich was in touch with Joe Fee, the man who was briefly detained in the Republic soon after the Croatian weapons find. An electrician in his mid-30s, Fee is originally from Inniskeen in County Monaghan. It was also stated in the House of Commons that Joe Fee had been identified by Garda intelligence in 1987 as the leader of the Republican terror group, the Continuity IRA. This is the group which began its military campaign in earnest in 1996 by bombing the Killy-Hevlin Hotel in Enniskillen. Joe Fee, as with Ante Tubelich, was working in the Balkans as an aid worker. Last year in Parliament, Fee, the man named as the leader of the Continuity IRA, was described as having worked in Bosnia as an employee of the Irish government. He was there as a consultant for the Department of Foreign Affairs. Incredibly, according to the statement, the man identified by Garda Special Branch in 1987 as the Continuity IRA Chief of Staff was in the Balkans 10 years later on behalf of the Irish government. We asked the Irish Minister for Foreign Affairs, Brian Cowan, if he wanted to comment on the subject. He declined to be interviewed. Instead, his department issued a statement.
Mr. Joe Fee was engaged as a consultant engineer in October 1996. He was recruited on a short-term contract ending in June 1997. He functioned as a monitor for the department in respect of work funded by Ireland Aid in Bosnia and carried out through non-governmental organisations present there.
It was also asserted in Parliament that Fee represented the crucial point of contact between Ante Čubilić, the leader of the Croat smugglers, and the Real IRA.
Mr. Fee, Andy Davis, BBC News. Would you like to respond to comments made in the House of Commons?
When we approached Mr. Fee, inviting him to respond to these allegations, he was reluctant to make any comment.
Mr. Fee, can I have a word with you for just one moment, please?
This is the man who, it was claimed in Parliament, had once been identified by the Irish police as the head of the Continuity IRA. Although separate organisations, the Continuity IRA and the Real IRA have frequently worked together in the past.
Well, it seems that the identities of the two groups have become a little bit blurred, that they've become much closer than they had been previously, and it's not known exactly what the deal was, whether Continuity were due to get any of the weaponry or whether the Real IRA funded it and agreed to give them some guns in return for their Chief of Staff's assistance in setting up the deal.
We can reveal how the Real IRA fits into the Croatian arms deal. Part of the evidence can be found on the pages of a hotel guest book. It was here at the Hotel Bellevue in Split that we discovered the name of Damien Lawless, a 31-year-old labourer from Dundalk. He'd booked into the hotel in May 1999, accompanied by two friends, a woman from Newry and a man from Armagh. Lawless had been to the city the year before, staying at this hotel. Damien Lawless is central to the Croatian arms smuggling. 5 months after his last visit to Split, he was one of the 10 people arrested at the Real IRA bunker in Stamullen. Last month he was jailed for 3 years for receiving training in firearms at the bunker. Most of those firearms had been smuggled in from the Balkans.
What have the police told you about the Irish people involved?
They didn't know much about them. They only have their names. They were staying in Split for several times during the last few years, in Split hotels. They used to meet in Split. Ante Čubilić says that he only knew them before they were in the same hotel. That's how he met them.
It's understood that Lawless and his companions arrived in Croatia in a white Citroën van registered in the northwest of France. They don't appear to have been in Split for the purpose of work. None is thought to have links with aid agencies. They did have links, though, with Ante Čubilić. The meetings were arranged by phone. There are records from the hotel park which show that the group phoned Čubilić's mobile twice. Once for 7 seconds at 9:30 in the evening on May the 20th, 1999. The other 2 days later at 11:15 a.m. That call lasted 12 seconds. This is how we understand the Real IRA arms deal was negotiated.
We have requested the investigation on the basis of the information given to us by the police, which links Ante and Joseph Čubilić with certain Irish citizens, also on the basis of the similarities that exist between the arms and ammunition found in Ireland and used in Great Britain, and those found in Croatia and Bosnia.
Streljiva, municije, eksploziva koje je pronađeno u Irskoj, upotrebljeno u Engleskoj I pronađeno u Dobranjama, odnosno Cistiprovu.
It's not known how many arms consignments Lawless would have organised for the Real IRA. The find at Stamullen confirms that at least one shipment from the Balkans got through. The weapons would have left Bosnia by truck and crossed into Croatia by mountain road, avoiding the main border crossings further south. There is no intelligence available on the route taken from Croatia to Ireland.
There are plenty of small ports along the Dalmatian coast in Croatia. You can get across to Italy quite easily by boat. Once in Italy, you're in the territory of the European Union, and you have a clear route by road and by sea back to Ireland.
This source of weapons from Croatia has finally been closed down, but it's unlikely that the police have recovered even half of the arms already imported. What's more, the Real IRA is eager to reap the benefit of its recent European investment.
Well, so far what they have been doing is utilising to the full the type of equipment and weaponry that they've brought in from Croatia, and that you've seen them using their RPGs, grenade launchers, and also using the new lunchbox bombs that they have. Initially they were going for what would be regarded as soft targets, but now we see them going for military bases, and the one on the attack on the Mi6 headquarters was a particularly daring one, so it shows that they are gaining in confidence.
Since its very inception, the Real IRA has been trying to target London. In 1998, the police caught 3 members of the organisation, including Anthony Hyland and Liam Grogan, as they prepared for a bombing campaign in the capital. Now, 3 years on, it appears the Real IRA has once again established an active service unit in the south of England. Soon after Mi6 was hit, the anti-terrorist branch began warning that further terrorist attacks in London could be imminent. And evidently, as events were to prove here outside the BBC 6 weeks ago, those fears were well-founded. The bomb at TV Centre was almost certainly the work of the Real IRA. After the attack, the police discovered fragments of a blue plastic container, one virtually identical to a device the Real IRA planted near a railway line in Newry last July. Dissident Republicans are also being blamed for the explosion outside a post office depot in North London on Saturday night.
They are prepared to go across a whole menu of attack options. That can only mean that there is the potential of heavy casualties, and all the tragedy that was seen at Omagh could be repeated again.
The most sinister factor in all of this surrounds the weapons find in Croatia last summer. When the security forces moved into Dobranja, they were expecting to find 2,000 kilos of explosives. They discovered just 20. If the missing packs exist, and they've already reached Ireland, then the Real IRA will have the capacity to sustain a major bombing campaign for many years to come.